To know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We're trying to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
You're watching and listening to GB News. Coming up this morning on The Political Correction, we're talking about the Conservative leadership race as we approach the second debate this evening, the rhetoric surrounding the upcoming heatwave in the UK, and mental health in schools. That plus plenty more after the latest news.
Good morning, it's just gone 10 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. An amber warning for extreme heat has come into force in England and Wales, with temperatures expected to hit 40 degrees in the coming days. The alert will also cover areas of southern Scotland from tomorrow. The UK's first red extreme heat warning has been issued for tomorrow and Tuesday, covering a large part of England. The Health Secretary says extra measures are being put in place for ambulances, plus additional contingency support will be implemented, such as extra staff to handle calls. The Cabinet Minister who led last year's UN Climate Change Summit says he could resign if the Prime Minister is not fully committed to net zero agenda. COP26 President Alok Sharma told The Observer some of the remaining candidates in the Tory leadership race had what he called a lukewarm on the emissions target. He urged them to set out their support for net zero strategy and green growth. The second televised leadership debate will take place later tonight. The Ministry of Defence says Russia's reinforcing its defensive across the areas it occupies in southern Ukraine. In its regular update, the British Defence says reinforcements including moving manpower and equipment, while Russian forces in southeastern Ukraine are upping their security measures. The government has announced all schools in England will have a defibrillator by the end of the next academic year. State-funded schools will be reviewed to see how many devices are needed. The number is estimated to be more than 20,000. Research shows accessing a defibrillator within 3 to 5 minutes of a cardiac arrest increases the chance of survival by over 40%. First deliveries are expected to be by Christmas. Around 1.3 million families across the UK are thought to be facing the cost of living crisis with no savings. New research has found in the period leading up to the pandemic, nearly half of families across Britain had less than a month's income stashed away. The Resolution Foundation says that whilst some rely on friends or family to bail them out, some believe they'll simply be unable to cope. A British man has been found dead next to a woman with serious injuries at a hotel in Florence. Italian media says that 40-year-old was found dead in his hotel room yesterday morning, having arrived on Friday night. The 43-year-old woman, thought to be his partner, is being treated at the city's hospital. Investigations are underway. The Culture Secretary is calling for young people to be better protected from spending money when playing video games. Nadine Dorries believes in-game purchases in video games, known as loot boxes, should be made unavailable to children unless they're approved by a parent or guardian. She's urging video games companies to do more to ensure that young people can't get access. A government review found players who've bought loot boxes may be more likely to have gambling, mental health or money worries. Buckingham Paris has released an official photograph to mark the Duchess of Cornwall's 75th birthday today. Camilla is pictured sitting relaxing and smiling at a garden table with flowers and plants in the background and next to a bowl of peaches. The picture was taken last month in the gardens of Camilla's retreat in Wiltshire, where the photographed peaches were grown. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to the political correction.
Good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News, and this is The Political Correction. I'm Gina Davison, and today I'm joined here in the studio by our very own Paul Embry. And in Northern Ireland by the birthday girl herself, Arlene Foster. We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. As you know, this is not about journalists talking to journalists. It's about you telling us what you think. Coming up this hour, we will be discussing the Conservative leadership race following the first televised debate on Friday night, as the process reaches a crucial phase. A national emergency has been declared after a red extreme heat warning was issued for the first time. But the sun is also bringing heat to our discourse, with many on social media clashing over how the weather is currently being reported. And we'll also be talking about mental health in schools after the Baroness Fox of Buckley made a statement in the House of Lords, urging teachers to focus less on mental health and more on reassuring young people about the challenges they face. And as ever, here on The Political Correction, we want to hear from you. So if you want to get involved in the conversation and have your message read out on the show, then email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us @gbnews. This is The Political Correction. The Conservative leadership race is approaching a crucial phase as the candidates gear up for another televised debate this evening, ahead of the shortlist being whittled down to just 2 candidates. In the first debate, which took place on Friday, the 5 remaining hopefuls clashed over tax, trans issues and the NHS. So, Paul, I know that you're an avid watcher of Conservative debate, so what did you make of the first one on Friday?
Oh, the bitterness and the vitriol, Deanna, it's fantastic for those of us on the other side of politics. Let them tear each other apart, I say. No, look, I mean, I think these debates often generate more heat than light, to be honest. I'm not a huge fan of these debates, but, I mean, what I do find interesting is how all of the Tory candidates seem to be trying to almost out-Thatcher each other at the moment, probably to appeal to the wider membership. You know, they're going for this agenda of low tax, low regulation, economy, rolling back the frontiers of the state and so on. And it's pretty clear that a number of candidates are now basing their campaign on that sort of agenda. I just think, actually, there's a danger for any candidate who wants to follow that particular agenda, because you need to remember that in 2019, you won constituencies like your own, Deanna, you know, red wall constituencies such as Bishop Auckland, where that kind of traditional Thatcherite, low tax, low regulation, get the state out of your lives, you know, everybody, every man for himself, every woman for herself kind of thing, I don't think is necessarily well received. It's not necessarily that agenda commensurate with those sorts of areas usually. And I think people in those constituencies, if they're going to continue voting Tory, and I hope they don't obviously, but if they are, I think they're going to be wanting something different. I think they're going to be thinking, you know, what can, not an overbearing state, but a protective state that can actually intervene in their lives and communities for the better, particularly during a cost of living crisis, particularly when, you know, some of them are struggling to get their foot on the housing ladder and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, it's interesting the direction that the debate has taken inside the Tory party. But overall, as a spectacle, I don't think any candidate was particularly benefited by the debate, and I don't think any candidate was particularly disadvantaged. That's my overall view.
And Arlene, what about you? What did you make of it?
Well, I think probably Rishi Sunak came out the best, and I'm not a supporter of Rishi Sunak, but I think he showed his gravitas during the debate. I just want to pick up on the point, though, that Paul makes about people being likened to Margaret Thatcher, because there's a piece by Bill Cash today in the Telegraph likening, I think it's Liz Truss to Thatcher. So there's almost this base now that everybody has to be who's most like Thatcher. And I think that that's probably wrong. I think, like Paul, people should be speaking up for their own policies and their own agenda. I'm sure when Margaret Thatcher was putting herself forward, she wasn't likened to anybody else. She was just herself and brought forward her own policies and objectives, and that's why she was the person she became as a leader that stayed in power for a considerable length of time. So I think it is a mistake to try and liken candidates to one or the other, but clearly it appeals to the Conservative membership if they think they're going to get another Thatcher because she was such a vote winner. And I have to say, the person who I think is the most interesting of all is Kemi Badenoch. I think she is bringing forward new, fresh ideas. Of course, she hasn't been in a serious government position, and that goes against her. But you know what? If we're going back to the Thatcher likeness again, she only held the Minister of Education, which at that time was seen to be a woman's portfolio. As you know, women weren't put into high-level portfolios, and she came forward and she became the Prime Minister. So I think Kemi's coming forward with some very interesting, new, fresh ideas, and she does have the advantage of not having been in the government to date. Because when I listened to Rishi Sunak, and today he's talking about how he's going to have a bonfire of EU regulations. Well, sorry, you've been Chancellor for a considerable period of time. Why is this only coming out now? Why are you only deciding to do this now when you could have been at the forefront of doing that before now? So it'll be an interesting debate later on this evening. But as you know well, Deanna, a lot of these debates are not about the content of the debate, but how people react, how they present themselves in these debates, how they cope with challenge. So it's as much about all of that as it is about the content of what they have to say.
Well, let's talk about challenge, because there were a few fiery moments, weren't there, in Friday's debate, particularly between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, and then Kemi Badenoch and Penny Mordaunt. Do you expect this evening that candidates will come out swinging even more, Arlene?
Yeah, I think they will, because they want to prove that they're tough. They want to prove that they're capable of leading, of course, not just the Conservative Party, but the country as Prime Minister. And we shouldn't forget that this leadership race isn't just about being Conservative leader, but also about being the Prime Minister of the country. So it is important that we hear from them what they see as their vision for the United Kingdom moving forward. And of course, you would expect me to say this, wouldn't you? I'll be wanting to hear what they have to say about the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I know we're going to talk about that later on, so I'll not go into detail about that now. But there's a whole range of issues, and to be fair, they have tackled them today in some of their opinion pieces, from housing to tax to regulation to immigration. And there's a lot of content there that we could discuss. And of course, I'm sure that Penny Mordaunt will continue to be challenged on her views around trans men, trans women, and whether they are women and men, because that seems to come back time and time again at Penny Mordaunt.
Yeah. Paul, there's something I want to ask you about, and that's about the kind of diversity of the candidates, because we in the Conservative Party see ourselves as a party of meritocrats, where it's simply the brightest and best that kind of get to the top, and we've got a very diverse range of candidates who are in the sort of initial 8 who put themselves forward. The Labour Party talks a really good game on diversity, and yet looking at kind of past candidates, it hasn't really kind of proven that it can do it, has it?
No, and credit where it's due. I mean, the Conservative Party has come on leaps and bounds in terms of representing a broader kind of spectrum over recent years. I remember John Taylor, a black Conservative candidate for Cheltenham, I think it was in the 90s, who received the most actually horrendous abuse, racist abuse, including from people within that constituency Conservative Association, when he was selected as the candidate, and that was 30 years ago. So yeah, and I think David Cameron, to be fair, credit where it's due, David Cameron tried to widen the appeal of the Conservative Party when he was the leader, in terms of having a kind of broader breadth of candidate. And I think some of that is probably bearing fruit. But at the same time, I don't think we should get too hung up on these things. I'm a great believer in, if you're the best person for the job, then frankly, irrespective of whether you're black or white or Asian or a man or a woman, I think, yes, we have to adhere to the principle that there should be no barriers to people advancing in politics or any other field of life because of their background, because of their biological characteristics. But beyond that, it's really important, I think, that we have the best person for the job in this sort of situation. There's a danger that you slip into tokenism. For example, I'm completely opposed to all women shortlists, which is something that the Labour Party have pushed for years and years, because that, I think, does slip into tokenism, and that's where I think people should say, no, that's not acceptable. I know a lot of women, in fact, who are against all women shortlists. So what might be interesting, and this is probably one for you, Deanna, I mean, obviously, all of these candidates are in place. And they do come from a very kind of diverse background. And I think you can see from the votes so far within the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there's, none of their backgrounds or biological characteristics represent any sort of barrier for them. Obviously, the final two then have to go to the Conservative Party membership. Do you think the Conservative Party membership would approach it in the same open-minded way, or do you think there may still be some of the problems that the Conservative Party suffered from in the past?
I think they'd approach it in exactly the same way because, as I said, I'm very proud to be a Conservative because we are meritocrats. We think it should be the best person for the job. And best person for the job in this case is kind of double-pronged, isn't it? It's who's going to be the best Prime Minister and do right by the country. But obviously, we're a political party. It's also who's going to give us the best chance of winning at the next general election. I think that's what's going to be at the forefront of Conservative members' minds, and they'll approach it very much in that way. But as you know, Paul, when it gets down to the final two, the two candidates will be touring all over the country, doing hustings with Conservative members and trying to set out their stall and prove why they're the best candidate. I think their performance at those hustings will be quite a large factor, actually, in how people vote. That is assuming people haven't decided already based on the ideas that have been coming out and based on performances at TV debates, but also experience and performance in the House of Commons chamber as well. It's going to be fascinating anyway.
It's going to be fascinating. I mean, my advice, not that I suspect any Conservative is going to take my advice, but I do think it's important to, in these sort of leadership elections, we've had them in the Labour Party as well, to concentrate on hard policy. I think it's very tempting sometimes when there's bitterness between individual camps and they're briefing against each other. It's very easy to slip into a very kind of insular perspective and just to get bogged down in the internal bitterness. Actually, that's not what the country out there is interested in. They're interested in hard policy. They're thinking, how are you going to overcome this cost of living crisis? How are you going to reduce the gap between rich and poor? How are you going to deal with the millions of people in insecure employment, with the wealth and income inequality inside the country at the moment? Those are the answers, or those are the questions, rather, that people out there in the country will be seeking answers to. So, any Conservative who thinks they're going to attract a wider layer of people simply by getting bogged down in the internal bitterness and infighting, I think would get a rude awakening.
I think that's exactly right. So I'm going to come to you two for predictions of who you think will be in the final two come Wednesday. Arlene, you first.
Well, I think Rishi's going to be in the final two, and then it becomes a little bit more difficult because we've seen the numbers move about. I'm going to stick my neck out and say Kemi. I hope it's going to be Kemi because I think that would be a really interesting battle. That's what my heart said. My head says it'll probably more likely be Liz or Penny. So I'm really hedging my bets.
You are hedging your bet slightly there, Ollie. Never mind. We'll allow it. We'll allow it. Paul?
I suspect it'll be Sunak and Mordaunt in the final two. I'm really disappointed Michael Fabricant didn't run Vienna. Britain needs a PM with a toupee. We've never had a PM with a toupee. It's about time. And you could have done us a big favour inside the Labour Party if you'd nominated Fabricant.
Well, next time, Paul, we'll get you in and you can run his campaign. How about that?
I don't know about that.
Well, we're delighted to say that joining us now live from Westminster is the GBNews political editor, Darren McCaffrey. So, Darren, we've got the next big debate this evening. What is the mood over there in Westminster?
Michael Fabricant for PM, that would be quite a moment, wouldn't it? Yes, the mood here in Westminster is very much focused on those debates, or that debate on ITV tonight with the 5 remaining candidates. It's going to be fascinating to see whether any of them take a slightly different change of strategy that we saw from Friday night. There was a sense maybe that Liz Truss needs to be a bit less still-sit, a little bit less wooden, maybe a bit more charismatic. Don't know how you feel about that, Diana. But also whether, frankly, Penny Mordaunt played it too safe and again needs to be a bit punchier. There was that sense looking at the list of questions that may have played into Rishi Sunak's hands. Clearly the economy and taxation dominated. As a former Chancellor, he's pretty much across the detail. Could there be a different selection of questions tonight, whether they be on Brexit or migration, etc.? So it will really be fascinating, and clearly the candidates today will be focusing an awful lot on that debate preparation. In saying that, we've seen a whole range of supporters out this morning on the TV channels and on the radio trying to defend and put forwards their candidate stall. Penny Mordaunt's in the last couple of minutes suggesting that she wants to see modest tax cuts, and that what some candidates are proposing is simply not responsible. We heard that also from Dominic Raab, essentially attacking Liz Truss, saying that she had not cut taxes when she was in the Treasury as Chief Secretary to the Treasury under Theresa May, and to judge people on their record. He, of course, is backing Rishi Sunak. In the end, though, this is it's quite interesting, clearly, for all of us. The question is it quite damaging for the Conservative Party? Yes, they're having a proper battle of ideas. Clearly, this is really important, given the fact that whoever takes over as Conservative leader in the next couple of months will become Prime Minister. And it is also clear during a cost of living crisis, there will have to be quite a significant economic change, if you like, or indeed an attempt to try and redress that cost of living crisis, particularly when it comes to fuel, energy prices. But also, there is an awful lot of personal tax. Now, that's part of the rough and tumble of politics, but it does give the impression that the Conservative Party at the moment is pretty divided. Does the electorate out there, do the ordinary British voters like a party that's divided? I'm not entirely sure they do.
And Darren, one thing that I'm finding fascinating is just how all over the place the polling is, isn't it? Whether that be polling amongst Tory members, national polling. It's quite difficult to figure out who really is the favourite, don't you think?
Yeah, it really is. And that's not least of all because, actually, let's be frank about this, particularly members of the public, but even Conservative members are struggling still to recognise who some of these candidates are. But, yeah, you look at Thursday night, Tom Tugendhat seemed to have won that debate according to a snap poll of ordinary voters. Penny Mordaunt is still ahead when you look at the bookies' favourites. Clearly people are putting money behind thinking she's going to get into the final two and eventually win. But then there's a poll in the Sunday Telegraph today saying among Conservative members, actually it's Rishi Sunak is out of the lead. Frankly, the bottom line, bit like all of us, we don't really know. And as I say, it's not helped by the fact, as I say, that lots of people still don't recognise who some of the candidates are. I think the most potent poll actually of this week was one done by Savanta. It was a little bit earlier on in the week, but it was after Penny Mordaunt's campaign launch, and only 14% of Conservative members, when they were shown a picture of her, could actually identify who she was. So yes, I think it is still a massively open race, and irrespective of who gets into the final two, in the end actually the Conservative membership, maybe apart from Rishi Sunak, who is clearly quite well known with the public, but frankly the other candidates will have to actually get to be known by the membership ultimately, because at the moment the biggest kind of category seems to be the I don't know, or the unknowns in all of this, and that's what makes, again, the next couple of months fascinating but also ultimately unpredictable.
So Darren, just quickly run us through what happens next. So there's another TV debate this evening, then what happens?
Yes, another TV debate tonight on ITV around 7 o'clock. That's going to be clearly quite a big moment, much bigger audience than Channel 4 in many regards. Then tomorrow, actually, there's a vote of no confidence in the government, which Boris Johnson will be trying to bat away. Not that we think that's going to go terribly far. The vote on that is at 10 p.m. In between all of that, though, is the third round. We think around 6 p.m. Tomorrow evening, MPs will go and vote in the third round of that vote. At least one candidate will be knocked out tomorrow evening. Then it goes through to a fourth round on Tuesday, a fifth round potentially on Wednesday. But there is also another TV debate on Sky on Tuesday evening, again, which could prove quite crucial, particularly if it's between the final three candidates. We will have a final two on Wednesday evening that will then go forward to the Conservative membership, and of course they get through the whole month of August to decide who that is. The announcement is made on September 5th.
Brilliant. Well, Darren, thank you for that rundown and for your insights there. Darren McCaffrey, our very own GB News political editor. And stay with us, because coming up after the break, we are talking about the upcoming heat wave and the conversation surrounding it, particularly on social media. And as ever, we want to hear from you today on the political correction. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, then email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. See you shortly.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to the Political Correction this morning. And as ever, loads of you getting in touch with your views on the Conservative leadership race. Paul, over to you.
Yeah, we've got Alan who says the Conservative Party needs a proper Tory. We tried a Remainer with Mrs May, who said Brexit meant Brexit, but all she did was try and keep us tied to the EU. We need a full-time Kemi, not a part-time Penny.
Ooh,
very clever.
Arlene, what have you got for us?
Saying that TV debates are a complete waste of time. Mainstream media ruin any proper debate. Ditch them. I have to say I agree with Dave, because at the end of the day, at the moment, the people who are making the decisions are the MPs. And do they really need television debates to make up their minds? I'm not sure that they do.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, there's certainly been a lot of kind of hustings going on for the actual electorate, for those Tory MPs at the moment. But I don't know, on the one hand, I guess the TV debates are a good way to test out candidates, make sure they've kind of properly been blooded in, make sure they can perform well under scrutiny. And as MPs, clearly that's something that we are concerned about. But I'm not sure how many people's mind they actually change, because as MPs, we can be quite stubborn once we've made a decision.
Well, a good example of that, Deanna, was in, I think it was 2010, which was the first TV debates of potential prime ministers in this country during the general election. And Nick Clegg, who was the leader of the Lib Dems at the time, I think there were maybe 3 debates, and the first one he performed particularly well. And the next day, polling was taken, which saw a surge in Lib Dem support directly as a result of that. And come the actual election, they didn't really improve upon their past performance. So it can maybe, you know, create a momentary improvement in fortunes, but in terms of anything long term, I don't think they really make a huge impact personally.
Yeah, agreed. So what else have we got? We've got Andrew here saying, on the current debate, the trouble is the nanny state becomes overbearing. Once the interfering in our lives starts, it expands and expands and expands. Paul?
Yeah, Pauline says the country needs to be brave and take a leap of faith for change. We lacked the courage at the last election to get fully behind the Brexit party. The two-party system is no longer fit for purpose. The last few years, it's felt like a one-party state, as it's difficult to differentiate between Tory and Labour. If we don't pay attention to the nefarious global elites and their influence on global politics, humanity deserves all that is hurtling towards us. Pretty powerful point from Pauline.
Interesting. And one there for you, a cheeky one here from John Taylor. In response to Paul effectively endorsing Michael Fabricant for Tory leader, saying Michael Fabricant has a toupee, really? Well, we'll get more of your views read out later in the show, so do keep them coming in on GBViews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBNews. Now, a national emergency has been declared after a red extreme heat warning was issued for the first time, as temperatures in Britain could hit 40 degrees. The Met Office's highest warning covers an area including London, Manchester and York on Monday and Tuesday, and it means there is a risk to life and daily routines will need to change. But the upcoming heat has become somewhat of a contentious issue, particularly on social media, with some saying the increase in temperature is an obvious sign of a warming planet, and others saying we should just enjoy the sun in peace. Paul, why do you think the rhetoric around the weather is heating people up so much?
I just think it's the nature of our times at the moment, Deanna. I think we're into a bit of a culture of ultra-safetyism. I think we saw during the pandemic what that meant in terms of extreme restrictions, the state entering areas of people's lives which it would never previously have entered, attacking people's freedoms and personal liberties in a way that, I don't think we would ever previously have dreamt of. So I think it's a mindset now where some people think if there's the slightest threat, then the state automatically has to become involved and take complete charge of the situation. And I'm uncomfortable with that. I mean, don't misunderstand me. I'm not against government giving warnings. I think it's fairly reasonable for the government to say, don't forget to keep yourself hydrated. For example, don't lock your dogs in hot cars, make sure you leave windows open and so on. I don't particularly object to that. But when it comes to things like, schools have already been closed in advance of Tuesday, I think, which is going to be the hottest day. Fun runs this weekend, I know in my local area have been cancelled. And I think that is just taking things to an extreme degree. Life is full of risks, and yes, it's sensible sometimes to mitigate those risks, but you can't eliminate them. And if you do, you're going to live in a society that becomes actually quite oppressive.
The thing I don't understand about the school closures as well is it's not as though we live in a society where you're going to be sending kids home to nice air-conditioned homes or flats. I just find it a little bit baffling, and given the few years that kids have had with education, can't say I'm particularly supportive.
And it's not easy. Sorry, Jen, I was going to say, it's not easy for parents to be told at late notice.
Quite right.
These parents are often working themselves, and they've been told, well, the primary school's closing, so they've got to make last-minute arrangements for their kids, which may mean them not being able to go into work and earn money. So all these sorts of implications that I don't think are often thought about very much.
Yeah, Arlene, I've seen you nodding away there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think common sense has just gone out the window, unfortunately, for people. I did read a headline on the BBC website which said, to avoid death, keep safe. Yeah, well, I think we're aware of that. But, I find it amazing that schools are closing when it's hot. Schools will probably close when we have snow and freezing. One wonders when schools are going to be open in the future, and that is a real concern because we know the damage that closing schools did during the COVID pandemic. There were a lot of unseen harms at that time, particularly for vulnerable children who were sent home to unsafe areas. And I just think it's mad. There are a lot of kids who, if they're sent home, they'll be running around, they'll not actually be inside, they won't be safe, and they'd be much safer at school. So I just think it's wrong that people have taken the decision to close schools. I think kids would be much better at school and safer at school. And I just think that, whilst we love to talk about the weather, we're British after all, it's, one of the things that we talk about all of the time. This is just taking it to a ridiculous level, and we all need to calm down, be sensible, be safe, take precautions, and not get so excited about weather coming. It used to be the case that when there was good weather coming, we'd all look forward to it. Now people, I was visiting an elderly relative yesterday, and he was saying, oh, people are going to die, Arlene, because of this heat. He was actually quite anxious about it. And I think it's wrong to make people anxious. Of course, you should take the precautions, but you shouldn't get to a level that it leads to anxiety. And I think we really need to take a good hard look at ourselves around all of this.
Some of the propaganda is quite subliminal as well, I think. If you look at weather forecasting maps now, once upon a time, if it was hot, you would have the nice, shiny sunshine symbols dotted all over the country. Now it's sort of a very deep red, there we go. It's a kind of deep red scorched earth thing. If you're in that zone, then you're going to get fried. So you just wonder how much that is built around, propaganda, and that then, feeds into the climate change debate. Not that I'm suggesting that climate change is propaganda for a moment, but you just wonder how much this is being done subliminally to get into people's heads.
I think one question I have, or concern I have really, if we're going to see hotter temperatures more regularly in the future, do we need to be doing more in terms of investing in infrastructure? Having different makeups of the asphalt in our roads to protect them against heat? Do we need to be putting in place extra protections for our rail lines? Because these are things that people are genuinely concerned about over the next few days, that trains may not be able to operate, that road surfaces may actually start melting. Arlene, I mean, it'd be a big infrastructure project, but do you think this is something government need to seriously consider?
Yeah, this is something that we should be considering, and this is what government should be thinking about rather than thinking about the things that we've been talking about. Because when you go to a country like Canada, for example, that has a lot of snow and very cold temperatures during the wintertime, they have taken proactive measures around their infrastructure to make sure that their cities and in fact, the whole country works during those periods of really low temperatures. And I think we need to think about our infrastructure and whether it's fit for purpose, whether our transport system is fit for purpose in these extreme weather conditions, because as well as high heats in the summer, we're probably going to see very cold winters as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we've got time for there, but send us your views. What have you made of the kind of rhetoric around the heatwave? Are you looking forward to it? What are you planning? Or are you concerned? Do you think that the government's taking the right approach in putting out these warnings and giving people advice? Send us your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, speaking this week in the House of Lords, the Baroness Fox of Buckley, Claire Fox, said there is a danger that if adults in schools continue to focus on mental health, young people will grow up with a skewed view of the challenges that they face. She argued that schools, rather than focusing so much on mental health, should aim to reassure young people about those challenges, and said she's concerned that we are in danger of pathologising children. Well, we're delighted to say that Baroness Claire joins us now. Claire, thank you for your time this morning. Tell us a little bit about what you said in the Chamber earlier this week.
Well, actually, it relates to the conversation you've just been having, because I heard Arlene talking about the fear injected into older people about the weather. And actually, if you look at practically every social and political issue as discussed in schools, it ends up creating anxiety and is seen through the prism of mental health. But my concern was an amendment being put forward to the schools bill, which was effectively arguing that mental health should be the cornerstone of schooling, that there should be Ofsted inspections of mental health provision. And I was worried, and am worried, and have been for some years, that the trials and tribulations of growing up, all those kind of fears about my friends don't like me, puberty, it's awkward being 14, 15, 16, isn't it? Mm. And if an adult way of discussing this is through the language of mental health, you end up with primary school kids going around saying, I'm suffering trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, because I've got tests coming up. They're using the language of anxiety and mental health discourse. And the irony is that where you have real problems of mental illness in the young, and of course there are some young people who get mental illness, that gets relativized in with people who are just having every single anxiety of growing up pathologized and medicalized. Mm-hmm. So that was my concern. And by the way, massive increase in the use of drugs, effectively, Valium, in young people, including primary school teachers, at the moment and subsequent to the lockdown measures.
Mm. It's one that I find really difficult, Claire, because I'm very kind of pro discussing mental health. I think people should be free to come forward and talk about the struggles they face. But I'm with you, certainly when it comes to medicating. I remember myself going for an appointment. I wasn't at school, I was just out of it. Spoke to the doctor for about 2 minutes saying, I'm feeling really down, I'm not really sure what to do. I had a prescription for antidepressants in my hand within about 2 minutes just to quickly get me out the door. And I think we need definitely a different approach to that, particularly with children, because the long-term effects of antidepressants can be quite troubling, as well as the side effects too. Paul, sorry, Claire, back to you.
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, I want to stress, I worked for Mind when many years ago, I've worked in the mental health profession. So I'm not suggesting that mental health is not an important issue. What I'm talking about is the therapeutic language that's basically come into school to describe everything. And I do think that we have got a problem when we see, young people have to learn to become resilient and deal with the difficulties that life will throw at them. And if you are in a situation where, for example, you fall out with your friends and, you have some big dispute and you end up going to a counsellor and saying, my mental health is affected, and this is affirmed by the schools, and in fact, the schools are incentivised to indicate what they're doing for the mental health of their pupils, then everything gets seen through that way, rather than saying, actually, this is what life's like and it's fine, you won't get on with everyone, you'll get over it, and so on and so forth. Because I think it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you effectively tell young people they can't cope, that their mental health is constantly under stress by life, then I actually think they won't be able to cope so well. They won't develop the mechanisms through which you actually learn to cope with cruelty or hurt or exams. I mean, one of the big things is the idea that exams are a mental health challenge. Well, no, they are stressful because you have to have done some revision and done some work. And so we know that, right? But everything posed like that, I think, we're not doing young people any favours at all. We're disarming them rather than helping them.
Is there not an argument, though, Claire, that if schools have a more kind of open approach to discussing mental health, that actually those kids with genuine, serious mental health conditions might be more tempted to come forward and get seen?
Well, I mean, I'm not suggesting a ban on all mention of mental health, am I? I mean, and also there's a sensitivity that you can establish amongst teachers to be aware of people and what the symptoms might be if somebody is very ill. I mean, goodness, if you're a teacher, you pick up if somebody's doing a lot of self-harming, right? Or, you know what I mean, if somebody's utterly, chronically depressed in the corner. I mean, I'm not suggesting that there's an insensitivity or that you never mention it. But I think you're underestimating what's happened. I think that the therapeutic language in education, the idea of organising schools around mental health and well-being. I mean, these are very broad categories, by the way. That has been going on for some time, and I'm suggesting that young people are not getting the help they need, but they self-diagnose. Because what happens is, you see, you end up seeing your problems in a medical way. You want a diagnosis. You then want treatment. Parents get embroiled in all this. What are you going to do for so-and-so? And you end up creating a sense of dependency amongst those young people. I suppose one of the ironies, because I know your programme has looked at this before, is that the one time that I did argue that one might want to give a bit more attention to the mental health of young people in recent times was the closing down of schools during lockdown, which I argued against and said, look, if you're going to, and actually we're going to have this on Monday with the weather, I mean, if anything's going to make you lose any sense of social normality or anything, it's going to be not being allowed to socialise at school with your friends, the panic and the fear that was generated by COVID and now by the weather. And everybody said, oh, no, we're doing that for children's safety. I mean, I actually think that will have had a detrimental impact on the psychological development of many young people. But the same people are arguing we should have therapists and counsellors everywhere, which, by the way, is not the role of the school anyway. I also want to stress that should be CAMS. There is a whole psychiatric arena that should be propped up and given more support in the health service. Schools have to predominantly educate, and this constant telling teachers that they have to be on the lookout for mental health problems, I think distracts from their core role, which doesn't mean they have to become monsters who are insensitive to any child that's miserable.
Brilliant. Well, Baroness Fox there joining us to talk about her contribution to the House of Lords debate around mental health in schools. Now, Arlene, I saw you nodding away at various points there. What did you make of Claire's argument?
Well, I think Claire has been very thoughtful about all of this. She's not saying that there aren't mental health problems with our young people. Of course there are. There always have been. And I think in the past, those weren't identified and weren't dealt with. Unfortunately, what has happened is that the pendulum has swung completely the opposite direction now, and everything is seen in the context of mental health instead of actually building up our young people in terms of resilience and well-being and using ways to tell them that, yeah, it is normal to be worried about exams and it is stressful. But, there are times in our lives when you are going to have to deal with stressful situations. You find ways to get through that, and you will come through it, and then you'll be on the other side. So I think this idea, and you've already mentioned it, that for every ill there has to be a pill. In other words, that you have to medicate young people who come and say that they are having difficulties is wrong. And we need to find the difference so that those children who are actually really suffering from mental health difficulties are found and are helped in an appropriate way. Because I have to say, here in Northern Ireland, our mental health facilities are not up to scratch, and we need to fund them in a much better way and to help those young people through. But, we're not going to help those young people by identifying a whole raft of young people as having mental health problems, when actually what they're going through is actually their teenage years.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, again, I saw you nodding away. What's your stance?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a great believer that you should give as much compassion and support to people who have got genuine mental health conditions. A compassionate society would do exactly that. But, grief, anger, stress, sadness, these things, disappointment, these things are actually normal, everyday human emotions. And in the life of most people, they will be from time to time unavoidable. And I am really concerned, actually, that every time a young person is experiencing one of those negative emotions, we're simply saying, well, check your mental health. That's a mental health issue. And it's a tough world out there. It's a tough world, and you need to develop as a young person the kind of resilience to be able to go forward into that tough world. And you'll go through life and you'll have setbacks and you'll have things that happen to you that cause you disappointment, and you've got to have the wherewithal to deal with that. So let's not spread the net so widely that every normal emotion is categorised as some sort of mental health condition, because I think that then becomes a real problem.
Yeah, well, send us your thoughts on gbviews at gbnews.uk, and stay with us, because coming up after the break, we're talking about grooming gangs and gender-neutral toilets, so don't go anywhere.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. An inquiry has found that more than 1,000 children have been groomed in Telford, with obvious exploitation ignored by authorities. The report found that key agencies dismissed exploitation as child prostitution and blamed the children rather than the perpetrators. They also concluded that exploitation was not investigated because of nervousness about race. And Paul, this was a story that you're quite passionate about. What did you make of the findings?
Well, it's a national scandal, Deanna, and it's not the first such example we've had of this type of grooming scandal. We've had them in Rotherham, in Oldham, in Rochdale, in Bradford. And it seems to me every time that no one's willing to speak openly about the problem. No one is really willing to join the dots. I mean, in this case, in Telford, we saw 1,000 young people, children, suffer sexual abuse. Now, the media and our public institutions made so much a couple of years ago during the so-called Me Too scandal, where, if an MP dared put their hand on somebody's knee, that was seen, by the way, I'm not suggesting it's right for MPs to do that, but nonetheless, that kind of thing was seen itself as a national scandal, and reputations were destroyed. There was a huge public outcry. It was, saturation coverage in the media. And yet these scandals, where there are thousands of young people as victims, happen again and again and again. And it's almost as if we say, oh, OK, we've had this inquiry now, let's put it to one side until the next one comes along. And it just seems to me that if you're going to live in a multicultural society and you want to talk about the benefits of multiculturalism, you also need to have an honest debate and say what some of the downsides are. And the truth is, there are and have been over the years a number of men, mainly from the Muslim British Pakistani community, who have engaged in this sort of behaviour, and we need to ask serious questions. We need to have a proper post-mortem. We need probably a public inquiry into this issue, and we need to start having an honest debate about why it's happening and what the underlying reasons are. And until we have that debate, these things are just going to keep happening.
Yeah. Well, joining us now to discuss this story further is former Scotland Yard detective Peter Bleksley. Peter, what have you made of these horrific findings?
Well, I echo everything that Paul says, but I'd take this a bit further quite a bit further, because, quite frankly, I'm enraged by yet another story, which is so similar to others in Rochdale and Oldham and other places. What we need is a criminal investigation into the actions of the police officers and possibly the council workers who decided these cases were not going to be investigated. Those people should be prosecuted for misconduct in public office, in my opinion. Then, if we see those people who did not carry out their duty properly and diligently, if we see them getting convicted of that crime and possibly being sent to jail, that will send out a very loud and clear message that you can't look the other way. You have to do your job.
And Peter, are there widespread calls for that level of investigation? Do you think it's likely?
Well, as we speak, I think I'm the only voice that is saying this, unfortunately. But perhaps some of your viewers and listeners might agree with me, and they might want to write to their MPs and otherwise campaign, because there were clearly crimes committed by those people who didn't do anything. You see, when it comes to misconduct in public office, with that particular offence, doing nothing can be a crime. So in cases where police officers did nothing with regards to these allegations, they should be investigated. And if the evidence can be gathered, charge them. Because I am sick to the back teeth of hearing these statements from police officers, senior police officers, where they say, oh yes, we have reflected, lessons have been learned, and all those hollow words that I hear time and time again. They count for nothing. Let's have some action. Let's have those perpetrators in front of a court.
Well, very clear direction there from you, Peter. Thank you for your time. And this is such a sort of harrowing story. We will come back to it in future weeks. But that was Peter Bleksley there joining us, former Scotland Yard detective, to talk about the findings of the Telford report. Now, a survey conducted by the campaign group Sex Matters has concluded that single-sex facilities, such as toilets, changing rooms and hospital wards, are vital when it comes to safety, privacy and dignity of both sexes. Maya Forstater, the executive director of the campaign group, said the research provides evidence of the strength of feeling and the voices of thousands of ordinary people who are being ignored. Well, we're joined now by the campaign group's Director of Advocacy and the author of Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality, Helen Joyce. Helen, tell us a little bit about the findings of your report.
Hi, thanks for having me on. So we already knew from polls that were weighted to the population that most people agree that single sex should mean single sex and not single gender or single gender identity, and that people think that in private spaces, toilets, changing rooms, dormitories, sleeper trains, and also in specialist places like rape crisis centres and prisons, women and men need to be able to be separate when they're vulnerable, when they're undressed, when they're sleeping, in particular for women. But what hasn't happened is to go beyond that and to say to people who value single-sex spaces, why? So that's what we did. We asked people in February to get onto us and answer a bunch of questions about single-sex spaces and say, what do you value about them? Because this is a human rights issue. It's not a popularity issue. If 60% of people are okay with single-sex spaces and 40% aren't, we still have to have single-sex spaces for the 40%. And it's often talked about as if it's something that the majority can overrule the minority. Well, already we know that it's the majority want them. We wanted to know why. And what women told us was really heartrending, how they couldn't be included in public life if they weren't able to get access to single-sex spaces, not just for the obvious things like getting changed in a swimming pool, but Muslim women need them to adjust their hijab. People who are victims, previous rape victims, may feel traumatized if they have to share with men in enclosed spaces. And so lots and lots and lots of women said that the trend for gender neutral or mixed sex spaces meant they had to stay home. Over and over again, we heard the sentence, I never went back.
Paul?
Helen, people on the other side of the argument would often use the argument, look, aren't you just dismissing every man as a potential predator? And if there are men out there who are determined to engage in abusive behaviour, then they would just go into a women-only toilet anyway and do it. If they have that intent, they're not going to be put off by a sign on the door. How would you respond to those arguments?
Well, it's the famous not all men argument, isn't it? I'm not saying all men, I'm saying some men. Almost all people who commit violent crimes, and in particular sexual crimes, are men, and overwhelmingly women are the victims. Men are also stronger than women, so can usually overpower a woman if they want. And it's about norms. If you've got clearly signed single-sex spaces and everyone understands that only female people go into this room, an obviously male person going in is automatically a suspicious person. So people said things like, when I was a teenager, a drunk man followed me into the toilets at a bar, but the bouncer came straight in afterwards and told him to leave. In mixed-sex spaces, no one would do that. We really heard some stories that I would very much like the sort of people who say, oh, this is scaremongering, this is just old-fashioned dinosaurs talking about, purity politics. I'd very much like them to read some of these stories and then look me in the eye and say it again.
And Helen, what about for trans people who clearly are a very small number in terms of kind of UK population? But it can be quite difficult, can't it, for a trans person to decide which bathroom to use, and particularly for trans women, if they were to use a male bathroom because biologically were born male, can be victims of kind of assault or abuse there, can't they?
So by saying that, you're acknowledging my point, which is that men are a danger. So it can't be both true that trans women should be allowed into women's bathrooms because men are a danger, and it's completely fine to allow men into women's bathrooms. These two things are just mutually incompatible. I agree that trans people need special provision. They are a tiny minority of the population, but they are a vulnerable minority. So yes, we can just have third spaces for them. I think that's the only way to do it. You add a single facility with a lockable door, floor to ceiling door. But in general, you need separate spaces for men and women, and no male people, however they identify, should not be going into female-only spaces. As soon as male people come into female spaces, they are no longer female spaces. So I don't actually think it's hard. I think it's clear. If you're male, don't go into female spaces.
Okay, well, very clear there from Helen Joyce. Helen, thank you for your time this morning. And do send us your thoughts and your views on views at gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. But don't go anywhere. That's it for the first hour of the show. But we've got plenty more to discuss. Stay with us.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning, you're watching and listening to GB News. Coming up on the Political Correction this hour, we analyse the Conservative Party leadership contenders' stances on the Northern Ireland Protocol. And Energy Minister Greg Hands joins us in the studio to tell us why he's backing Rishi Sunak for number 10. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Simon.
Good morning, it's just gone 11 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. An amber warning for extreme heat has come into force in England and Wales, with temperatures expected to hit 40 degrees in the coming days. The alert will also cover areas of southern Scotland from tomorrow. The UK's first red extreme heat warning has been issued for tomorrow and Tuesday, covering a large part of England. The Health Secretary says extra measures are being put in place for ambulances, plus additional contingency support will be implemented, such as extra staff to handle calls. Europe continues to be gripped by the extreme heatwave, with fires raging through northeastern Italy. Firefighters have been battling wildfires over the weekend. One broke out near Rome, with flames reaching the town centre, forcing families to evacuate as a precautionary measure. Rivers and reservoirs are drying up across the country, adding to the worst drought the country has seen in 70 years. Temperatures are expected to hit 42 degrees Celsius in many North Italian cities next week. The cabinet minister who led last year's UN climate change summit says he could resign if the next prime minister is not fully committed to the net zero agenda. COP26 President Alok Sharma told The Observer some of the remaining candidates in the Tory leadership race had been what he called lukewarm on the emissions target. He urged them to set out their support for the net zero strategy and green growth. The second televised leadership debate will take place later tonight. The Ministry of Defence says Russia's reinforcing its defensive strategy across the areas it occupies in southern Ukraine. In its regular update, the British Defence says reinforcements include moving manpower and equipment, whilst Russian forces in southeastern Ukraine are upping their security measures too. The government has announced all schools in England will have a defibrillator by the end of the next academic year. State-funded schools will be reviewed to see how many devices are needed. The number is estimated to be more than 20,000. Research shows accessing a defibrillator within 3 to 5 minutes of a cardiac arrest increases chances of survival by over 40%. First deliveries are expected by Christmas. Around 1.3 million families across the UK are thought to be facing the cost of living crisis with no savings. New research has found in the period leading up to the pandemic, nearly half of families across Britain had less than a month's income stashed away. The Resolution Foundation says while some will rely on friends or family to bail them out, some believe they'll simply be unable to cope. A British man has been found dead next to a woman with serious injuries at a hotel in Florence. Italian media says the 40-year-old was found dead in his hotel room yesterday morning, having arrived Friday night. The 43-year-old woman, thought to be his partner, is being treated at the city's hospital. Investigations are underway. The Culture Secretary is calling for young people to be better protected from spending money when playing video games. Nadine Dorries believes in-game purchases in video games, known as loot boxes, should be made unavailable to children unless they're approved by a parent or guardian. She's urging video games companies to do more to ensure young people can't get access. A government review found players who've bought loot boxes may be more likely to have gambling, mental health or money worries. Buckingham Palace has released an official photograph to mark Duchess of Cornwall's 75th birthday today. Camilla is pictured sitting relaxed and smiling at a garden table with flowers and plants in the background and next to a bowl of peaches. The picture was taken last month in the gardens of Camilla's retreat in Wiltshire, where the photographed peaches were grown. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. Let's get back to the political correction.
Good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News, and this is the political correction. We're here for the next hour to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. Coming up this hour, we'll delve into the Conservative leadership contest from a Northern Ireland perspective. How would each candidate tackle the protocol question? Conservative MP and Energy Minister Greg Hands joins us to explain why he's putting his trust in Rishi Sunak. And legendary broadcaster Alastair Stewart gives us a glimpse into what's coming up on his midday show. And as ever, send us your views on the big stories of the day by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is the political correction. Well, thank you guys for your input in the first hour. We have had views absolutely flooding in on some of those big stories that we have been discussing. First one I want to touch on was following the discussion we just had around same-sex spaces. Single-sex spaces, I should say. Jamie says, I completely agree with Helen, but wanted to hear from Paul on this. So, Paul, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I have enormous sympathy with what Helen said, actually. I mean, I joined the fire service 25 years ago, Deanna, and at that time, women firefighters, of which there were not very many, were expected just to use exactly the same facilities as the men. And I know women firefighters who fought long and hard. I mean, it was a really principled, long struggle to get their own single-sex spaces within fire stations, their own toilet facilities, their own locker rooms, their own shower facilities, and so on. And it wasn't easy securing those advances. And I speak to women firefighters now who see what's going on with, you know, this obsession about gender-neutral facilities and think, well, why did we campaign so hard for what we achieved? Is there a danger that all of that is going to be rolled back? And I think actually that some of those concerns are really valid, and the safety concerns are valid as well. No one is saying that every trans person is a potential predator, but I tell you this as a father, if my 12-year-old daughter was in what should be a single-sex toilet space and a biological man walked in, I would not be happy about that, and I would be doing something about it, and I would challenge anybody who tried to stop me doing something about it, because, you know, the safety of the women in my family comes before any political ideology as far as I'm concerned, and it's simply not good enough to say, you know, well, trans rights are human rights, you should just forget about it and turn a blind eye to it. So what Helen said, I think, has an enormous amount of merit, and we need to keep honing in on this argument because it's not going to go away, rightly so.
I found it particularly interesting, her point there around spaces for kind of trans people to, you know, toilets and things. Isn't the answer, or isn't part of the answer, it's not possible in all scenarios, of course, but certainly in new buildings, to just have self-contained sort of toilet spaces with a sink and a mirror and all of that jazz, so that anyone can use it, but you go in there as, you know, you go in there individually and lock the door. Wouldn't that be a solution, really?
Well, I mean, something like that, you know, I don't have a particular issue with. If you look at trains, for example, you know, there are isolated rooms, toilets on trains, which both sexes can use. But I think the minute you open up spaces for the potential for others to be in there with you, and the minute you say, actually, as a woman, you have to expect that a biological man might enter this space, then you have to recognise that that dangers then suddenly exist. Now, no one is saying that those dangers, those risks are overwhelming, but any sort of safeguarding is built around often a low level of risk. And in this case, it may be a low level of risk, but that in itself is not a reason to say, well, there should be no safeguarding. I mean, we've had a discussion this morning, for example, about what the weather's likely to be next week, and all of the sorts of warnings and all of the sorts of safety advice. The reality is most people are not going to be affected by it, but the government seems fit to give that advice and those warnings anyway. Why, when it comes to issues around gender and single-sex toilets, do we suddenly say, well, the risk may be low, so we might as well forget the safeguarding? You know, I'm not having that, frankly.
Well, we are delivering for Jamie today. Jamie, you wanted to hear Paul's view, and there you have it. But do keep your views coming in. We're going to read out more later on in the show. But now, on to our next story. Because political discourse has been dominated at the moment by the ongoing contest to replace Boris Johnson. But the row over the Northern Ireland Protocol and Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom continues to roll on. Whoever becomes Prime Minister in September will have to find an agreeable solution to the dispute. So, where do the budding Tory leaders stand on the protocol, and who is best placed to solve it? So, Arlene, I want to mainly throw to you here. Who have you been the most impressed with out of the remaining 5 candidates when it comes to tackling the protocol?
Yeah, well, I think before I say that, I just go back to the protocol and where it came from. I mean, because it's not a situation where it came from just a practical solution to dealing with the single European market and keeping the risks away from the European Union. It was about a political decision too. So it's political and practical. That's not where I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be dealt with in a practical way, using alternative arrangements, making sure that there was not a drama around moving goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. But unfortunately, the protocol came about after Theresa May back in 2017 ceded ground to the European Union and indeed most of all the Irish government. So we find ourselves in a place where Theresa May, Boris Johnson brought us forward, first of all, the backstop, then the protocol. Latterly, Boris and his team have been trying to deal with the vagaries of the protocol and the difficulties that it causes to us here in Northern Ireland. The protocol bill has passed its second reading. And it was interesting to note that Penny Mordaunt didn't vote on the protocol bill at its second reading. So that's one thing I've noticed about the campaigns that have come forward. Rishi Sunak, of course, he reportedly didn't want the government to trigger Article 16, which was the mechanism to say, hold on a second, we need to revisit this whole protocol and look at the damage that it's doing. You recall back in October of last year, when David Frost was leading on Brexit negotiations, there was a very strong sense that Article 16 was going to be triggered. It wasn't. And all of the thought at that time was that it came from Treasury and Rishi Sunak, that they didn't want to cause a drama with the European Union. So I think the weakest probably on the Northern Ireland Protocol is Rishi Sunak, followed probably by Tom Tugendhat. We haven't heard much from Kemi Badenoch in relation to the protocol, but given everything that she said around Brexit and around the Union, I would expect her to be supportive of dealing with the protocol in a proactive way. Liz Truss, of course, has been leading on the new legislation, so I expect her to continue with that protocol legislation. Penny Mordaunt hasn't said overly much about the Northern Ireland Protocol as well, and as I've said, she didn't vote on the last piece of legislation. So it's a mixed bag, really, Deanna and Paul. I would say probably the strongest on the Northern Ireland Protocol, from my reading at the moment, is Liz Truss, and possibly followed by Kemi Badenoch. But it'll have to be dealt with if people care about the United Kingdom. If it is the Conservative and Unionist Party then they need to deal with it, and they need to deal with it up front. They will deal with the European Union, who, of course, see the protocol as the law of the Medes and Persians. In other words, that it can't be altered. But that's, of course, wrong, because if you look at the protocol itself, it has the space there in Article 13 for replacement or additions to the protocol. And they really need to be tough with the European Union, whoever the new leader of the Conservative Party is.
Well, Arlene, thank you for that very thorough rundown there about where the different candidates are on the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I'm sure, as ever, we'll continue to discuss it here on the Political Correction and continue to get your insights there. Because it is a massive issue and it needs sorting out. You know, if we're going to properly get Brexit done, we need to tackle this and, you know, secure the integrity of this United Kingdom. Well, moving on to our next chat. And as you know, coming up at midday is the broadcasting legend Alistair Stewart. And we are delighted to say we are now joined in the studio to look ahead to his show.
Hello.
Hello. So who have you got on today?
David Lidington and Freddie Gray. David, former Deputy Prime Minister. Freddie, Deputy Editor of The Spectator. And we've also got Bob Neal, and we have got Christopher Chope. It's interesting that we've now got to that point, and I know you want to talk a little bit about the debates, but as the leading lights are focused on the next debate, a few of them are coming out now. They're sitting in their bunkers, prepping up and doing their homework and chilling out. But what we've really gone for, because I think it helps GB News viewers and listeners, is to sort of try and probe out some of the nuances and the differences of opinion, and they're all great runners and riders in that respect. We're also, if I want to put a plug in for this, because it really does matter to me and my team, on the weather and the heat wave, we're looking at it from a gardener's perspective and from a farmer's perspective, because there are real issues there. You know, people love and cherish their gardens, but they can't use much water at the moment. And for farmers, it's about their livelihood. So, yeah.
Brilliant. So let's talk about those leaders' debates.
Yes.
Because they first came about back in 2010. Obviously, that wasn't a Tory party leadership one. That was the three party leaders in ahead of the general election in 2010. And you hosted the first ever one.
Well, I did, and it's a funny little story as to why people say, "Oh, you're lucky, you hosted the first one." It was actually drawing straws. The three presenters, anchors, call us what you will, were my lovely friends Adam Bolton for Sky and the great David Dimbleby at the BBC. But literally, with none of us in the room, somebody just drew straws, and ITV were lucky enough to come out first, and then Adam was second, and David got the final one. It's extraordinary to think that that's 11 years ago now. But I think the point you make in that lead-in to our conversation, as it were, is the crucial one. It was clear-cut and focused. We were looking at three men, as it happens, all white males as well, as it happens, one of whom would become the Prime Minister. And in that sense, whether you were somebody living in Berwick-on-Tweed or Truro, it mattered to you. What worries me very slightly at this stage of the Tory leadership debates is that at the moment there's only about 350 of you who have a say, until we narrow it down to two. And then when it's two, there's only about 200, 150,000 who have a say. Now, on that final debate, there's absolutely no doubt that everybody will want to listen to it and hear what the two people, one of whom will be Prime Minister, has to say, because that impacts on everybody, whether you're Green, Tory, Labour or what have you. I do find the massed ranks at this juncture not terribly focused and not terribly informative.
Alistair, do you detect a rerun of the ideological differences that broke out in the Tory party in the 70s? I'm thinking of what were called the Wets, the One Nation Tories on the one side, and then all of a sudden, with the advent of monetarism, you had Thatcher and the Dries and rolling back the frontiers of the state. I think some of the debate that we recently saw with these and some of the media debate is along those fault lines. Would you share that view?
No. And I mean, not to fall out over it, but in a curious sense, I wish it was. Because I think if you take
more about personality,
and pragmatism, and you take, for me, the two flashpoints in the Channel 4 debate that Krishnan Guru Murphy did was when Rishi suddenly came out of his shell, all guns blazing, on Liz about the timing of tax cuts and the need to wrestle with inflation. That's got nothing to do with ideology, because I hope anybody engaged in politics is concerned about the level of taxation that we all face and the struggles that we have day in, day out with inflation. The other, which was a little more ideological, and in that sense I found it intriguing, was Kemi Badenoch on Penny Mordaunt over self-identification, ID, gender and the rest of it, because that issue, which a lot of my fellow presenters and your fellow presenters here at GB News feel absolutely passionately about, is not an issue from when I was growing up in politics and becoming really keenly interesting in. And the degree to which it is beginning to define a part of this debate, that I do find interesting. But on the core, you know, whether you're a wet or a dry in the early years of the Thatcher administration, that was an echo of the row that Margaret and her gang had with Ted and his gang about whether you're a Keynesian, pump money into the economy because there's no tomorrow, or absolutely Friedman, Chicago School, cut the money supply, control inflation, cut public spending, and Margaret obviously won. But I think we might be entitled to a little more of that. Yeah.
Interesting.
I think one of the things that I'm finding very interesting about it is trying to figure out which audience it is that the different kind of contenders are playing to, because, of course, as you rightly said, Alistair, at this stage, the electorate is 360-ish Conservative MPs. They're the only ones at the minute who have a say to whittle it down to the final two. Beyond that, it's Conservative Party membership. And yet those TV debates, the audience is from a broad political spectrum. Channel 4, not always known for being the most kind of...
We've got 1.5 million viewers, which for them that's a good audience.
Right, so which audience are they playing to? Which audience should they be playing to?
Well, if they're really clever, and I know one or two of them personally and like them a great deal, as you well know. Others, to be honest, I don't know quite so well. But if they're really clever, the audience that they're playing to are the members of their local party association. That's why yesterday we had an absolutely brilliant voice from the Newcastle Conservative Association, and today we've got one from the Vale of Glamorgan.
We've got a Conservative Association in Newcastle.
In Maggie's day, there were Tory MPs in Newcastle. Always worth looking back at the history. And so in that sense, you can maybe have somebody who, Surrey South West, because Hunt's fallen out of it now. So the local Tories in Surrey South West might listen to the debate and then say to Jeremy, now that you're not running, we really think that you should be backing X, Y or Z. That's really clever politics, and I suspect that some local activists will be doing exactly that this very weekend.
Well, certainly it's going to be a great show, and it's jam. You've got some very good guests coming on your show, actually.
We do our best, you know.
You do brilliantly.
He's a big draw, isn't he? He's a big draw. He's a broadcasting legend.
Well, do you know, we do one of those very rare things which you guys do as well in television journalism, is we try to ask intelligent questions, and then, crucially, we listen to the answers.
I heard a rumour you're going to have the Pope on the sofa next week. I don't know if that's a bit far-fetched. I wouldn't put it past you, Alistair.
I have interviewed him once, albeit only on a plane coming back from Rome at the time of the Falklands War. But when I did Mastermind with my lovely friend John Humphreys, he said, who are the two people you'd most like to interview? And I said, the Pope and Mick Jagger. And he said, in what order? And I said, Mick Jagger.
Well, you heard it here first. And make sure when we're done here on the Political Correction in about 40 minutes' time that you don't go anywhere, because there's a cracking show coming up with our very own Alistair Stewart. But absolutely don't go anywhere now, because coming up next, after the break, we'll be doing our Common Ground segment with Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Romain. And Minister Greg Hands joins us to discuss why he wants Rishi Sunak in number 10. See you shortly.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. Now, Sunday is a special day for Christians, but we acknowledge that faith comes in all shapes and sizes. And here on The Political Correction, we aim to talk to someone each week at the heart of his or her community to discuss what brings us together, in other words, our common ground. And this week, I'm delighted to say we're joined live from Berkshire by the director of Maidenhead Synagogue, Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Romain. Rabbi, thank you for your time this morning. And I know one of the hot topics is literally a hot topic. You want to talk about the heat wave?
Yes, and I'm very pleased that our religion school, which we have on a Sunday morning, is now over, because otherwise we'd be sweltering away in the classroom. But I have to tell you, it's all to do with habit, because for about 6 months I was living in Israel on a sabbatical, and you just get used to it. And also it's to do with the way you build your houses. Obviously with air conditioning, but even in pre-modern times when you didn't have air conditioning, what they do is they build their houses with stone floors rather than wooden floors, which then have carpets and rugs on, which keep the heat in. Stone floors are much cooler. You don't use curtains, that keeps the heat in too. You use blinds instead. And you don't insulate the walls. So actually, if this becomes a regular feature, it means we're going to have to start redesigning our houses so that we don't sweat as much. But it sort of also brings to fore the question of the long term. Is this a one-off or is it a pattern? And the whole issue of climate change. And, you know, it's been very hard to relate to sort of polar bears and ice caps melting when people tell us about that. But this sort of weather really makes you think, is it really coming our way? And my hope is that the current energy crisis and the Russian invasion of Ukraine isn't going to stop the investment, the long-term investment in wind power and sea power, because that really is the way forward.
And Dr. Romain, what do you make of the fact that there are schools across the country that are going to be closing next week? Because we've had a bit of a discussion about that on the show earlier.
Well, I'm a great one for going ahead, if at all possible. And I suppose, you know, if you have got really, really old-fashioned schools where there is virtually no ventilation and the heat just accumulates, then frankly, we'll be daft to go ahead. But on the other hand, that means sending the children home. And if parents are out working, how are they going to look after the children? So it's not an easy solution. And if it's at all possible, I would like to see the schools keep going and make sure the children are well ventilated and well looked after. Because homes are not necessarily any better, particularly if you're in a flat that gets a lot of heat from the ones above and below. And, that's going to be even worse for the children. So if at all possible, I would like the schools to stay open.
Then I understand that the second thing you wanted to discuss with us today is around the reversal of Roe versus Wade in the States.
Yes, I mean, this really puzzles me because there's this thing about the religious right, or the religious groups being anti-abortion, whereas actually, if you actually look at the Bible, which most Christians and Jews take as the core text, then I won't say it's pro-abortion, but it certainly allows it. I mean, there's a very famous episode, just to make things short, in the book of Exodus 21, where it talks about this scenario of two men fighting, and there's a pregnant woman standing by. This, by the way, is in an age where the death penalty was quite common. And the rule is that if the woman gets injured, because she gets caught up in the fight accidentally and has a miscarriage, then the two men have to pay a fine. But if the woman herself gets killed, then they themselves get the death penalty. So in other words, they make a clear distinction between the life in existence, the woman, the mother, and the life in potential, the fetus. And the Bible quite clearly says they are not equal, which is why Judaism has always allowed abortion, not as a light matter. Of course, it's a very serious matter, but the mother's health always comes first. And that could be physical health, but it can also be her mental health as well. So we would say that, I won't say a relaxed attitude to abortion, but a permissive attitude in circumstances when there are good reasons for going ahead.
Well, that's genuinely very interesting. I wasn't aware of that. And then
I was going to say there's this image of it sort of the secular for abortion and the religious against. It's not that simple at all. There's a big debate within the religion about whether for or against. And of course, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, of course. And then finally, we can't not ask you about it. It's the big story of the week, and that is the Conservative leadership contest. What have you made of the contest as a whole so far?
Well, I have to tell you, it's much better than Wimbledon. We've got knockout rounds, we've got sort of cries of foul play, and we're building up to this crescendo of the final two contestants playing to the crowd. I don't have a favourite in terms of policy, but I must admit I do like the fact that Rishi Sunak is saying we've got to be realistic. Yes, of course, tax cuts, but first of all, we've got to bring down inflation because that affects everybody. And I hope that whatever tax cuts there are very targeted. So it's at those on the lowest income, because rich people don't need tax cuts. We'd like them, but they aren't the ones to have them. I would also like to see a discussion move on to some other areas, perhaps social policy, which tend to get ignored. I would like, for instance, assisted dying to be legalised for those who are terminally ill and dying in pain. I would like faith schools to be more inclusive so that they become like free schools where they can have only a maximum of 50% of children from any one faith, so that we mix people in society and don't have Jews, Christians, Muslim, Hindus growing up as strangers to each other. And I'd also like to see very strong support for Ukraine carry on as part of our foreign policy. So I'd like those all to be discussed and upfront.
And Dr. Amain, very quickly, what's your prediction for who might win the contest?
I've got no idea. I hope that Rishi will, Sunak will, but, there we go. And by the way, I know some people complain that it's a limited number of people, MPs or later on Conservative Party members who are going to choose, but that's because we elect a party. It's not a presidential system. If it was presidential, then yes, it would have to be the population as a whole. But we're not. The party's already been elected, Conservative, for right or for wrong, and who its leader is really secondary to the party manifesto.
Yeah, well, hear on that. I think there has been moves towards more presidential system in the minds of many, but as you rightly said, we have a parliamentary system here in the UK, and in my view, long may that remain. Well, Dr. Amain, thank you so much for your time and your insights this morning, as always, and we hope to see you back on the Political Correction very soon. Now, don't go anywhere, because coming up, we're joined by the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Minister, Greg Hands, about the ongoing leadership saga and why he thinks Rishi Sunak is Britain's best choice. But first, here are your latest news headlines with Simon.
Hello, it's 11:32. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. The Health Secretary says extra measures are being put in place for ambulances as extreme heat and the amber warning is in place for England and Wales, with temperatures expected to hit 40 degrees in the coming days. The alert will also cover areas of southern Scotland from tomorrow. The UK's first red extreme heat warning has been issued for tomorrow and Tuesday, covering a large part of England. Europe continues to be gripped by the extreme heat wave, with fires raging through northeastern Italy. Firefighters have been battling wildfires over the weekend. One broke out near Rome, with flames reaching the town centre, forcing families to evacuate as a precautionary measure. Rivers and reservoirs are drying up across the country, adding to the worst drought the country has seen in 70 years. Temperatures are expected to hit 42 degrees Celsius in many North Italian cities next week. The cabinet minister who led last year's UN climate change summit says he could resign if the next prime minister is not fully committed to the net zero agenda. COP26 President Alok Sharma told the Observer newspaper that some Tory leader candidates had been what he called lukewarm on the emissions target. He urged them to set out their support for the net zero strategy. The second televised leadership debate will take place tonight. The government has announced all schools in England will have a defibrillator by the end of the next academic year. State schools will be reviewed to see how many devices are needed. It's estimated to be more than 20,000. Research shows accessing a defibrillator within 3 to 5 minutes of a cardiac arrest increases survival rate by over 40%. First deliveries are expected to be by Christmas. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to the political correction.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We're trying to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to the political correction, and now back to the burning topic of the day of who is going to be our next Prime Minister. And I'm delighted to say we're joined now in the studio by the Minister of State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth, Conservative MP for Chelsea and Fulham, Greg Hands. So, Greg, before we get stuck in and talk about your candidate, I want to know, what do you make of the contest so far and the sort of blue on blue that we're starting to see?
Well, I actually think it's been a very good contest, and I think the candidates conducted themselves well. The debates, the hustings that you and I have seen between Conservative MPs are very good. I thought the Channel 4 debate was very good, at least from the candidates. I'm not sure sometimes the actual moderation, I think, wasn't particularly favourable to us. But I think overall, the contest, I think, has been well done, has been very informative, and I think the candidates generally have conducted themselves well.
So let's talk about who you're backing, because you came out for Rishi Sunak. Why do you think Rishi's the man?
Yeah, well, I think Rishi is the best candidate because he's got the economic track record. And given the economic issues that are coming up, particularly coming up right now with things like energy prices and inflation, but also Rishi is, in my opinion, the one who polls the best with the general public in terms of like winning the next general election against Keir Starmer, Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP, you know, all of these things. I think Rishi is best placed to win that election. He's also best placed to be our Prime Minister for the coming years.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about polling. I mean, it's all over the place, isn't it, frankly, when you look at different polling sources. But I'm always interested in looking at Con Home, because that tends to be people who are Conservative-minded, Conservative members. And the runoff polling for if Rishi were to make the final two against other candidates hasn't been great. What do you make of that?
Well, I think the Con Home panel, of course, is a slightly self-selecting panel. When you look at the polls, like the actual polls, like weighted polls of Conservative members, Rishi does very well. When you look at floating voters and those who are likely to vote Conservative, Rishi does overwhelmingly the best. The JL Partners poll yesterday of all of the Conservative-held seats showed that Rishi was the best choice for Prime Minister in 76% of those seats. So three-quarters of Conservative-held seats right the way across the southwest of England, right the way across the east of England, big parts of the north and the Midlands into Wales. You know, Rishi was the best choice in 76% of Conservative-held seats.
Greg, it's one of the problems for you. We were talking about it at the top of the show. The fact that the candidates are to a certain degree conflicted in the sense that they're trying to play to two audiences. There's the internal Conservative Party membership, and I think that's probably why some of the candidates are coming out with this very sort of Thatcherite, low tax, low regulation, get the state out of people's lives agenda. But actually, if you look at the people you need to keep hold of in the country, it's red wall voters in constituencies like Vienna who have very little sympathy with that agenda and actually want the state to intervene to improve their lives and communities. That's a problem for you, isn't it? Any candidate appealing to those two audiences.
Well, I think you've got to, I mean, ultimately, to win, you've got to appeal to all three. You've got to appeal to your MP colleagues, you've got to appeal to Conservative voters or people likely to be Conservative voters, and you've got to appeal to floating voters. And in my opinion, Rishi Sunak is the one who does all three. He's ahead on MPs, he's ahead amongst people who are likely or considering voting Conservative in the next election. As I say, 76% of those Conservative-held seats rate Rishi Sunak as being the best choice for Prime Minister. So I think Rishi Sunak actually wins on all three.
How many of the Conservative Party membership, though, will see him, for right or wrong, as the guy who stabbed Boris Johnson in the back? Bearing in mind, Boris Johnson still has quite a bit of support amongst the grassroots in the Conservative Party. That's likely to count against Sunak, isn't it?
Well, I think, I mean, Rishi served as his Chancellor for all but the last 10 days or so. And I think he found, in the end, his position was becoming very, very difficult because of what was going on at Number 10. So I don't think it would be right. I mean, ultimately, I think 59 government ministers resigned following Sajid Javid and Rishi Sunak. You know, I don't think it would be fair to say that that Rishi caused the demise of Boris Johnson. That, I think, would be unfair.
Mm-hmm. So, predictions then, Greg. Obviously, you want Rishi Sunak to be in the final two and win the contest, but who do you suspect will actually make it to that final two?
Well, I don't really want to make predictions, Deanna.
Go on, that's why you're here. Come on.
Other than the fact, I hope it will continue to be a good contest where we're always thinking, you know, who are the real opponent here? The real opponent is not each other. The real opponent is the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, the Lib Dems, the SNP. Those are we've got plenty of real opponents without finding new opponents within the Conservative Party who are actually our friends. So we need to make sure that it's honest debate, that we show the MPs, the members, what are the differences between Rishi Sunak and the other candidates. But ultimately, we've got to be thinking our fire should really be focused across the aisle rather than along the aisle, if you follow me.
Mm-hmm. And do you think the candidates are recognising that? Because certainly at that leaders' debate on Channel 4, there were a few moments where it did get quite spicy.
Yeah, I mean, it did. But I think that was also quite informative. And I don't think, from what I remember, I watched the whole debate, I don't think it really got personal. there was definitely some differences on tax policy, on borrowing, and there were some differences on gender policies. But I don't think that anybody sort of attacked anybody sort of personally, which I think was very, very good, and I think showed the Conservative Party in a good light.
There's one thing that Rishi Sunak's narrative keeps saying, and it's something that I'm finding uncomfortable, and I wonder whether other candidates in that leadership contest will be. And this is the notion of tax cuts now and it not sort of leading to inflationary impacts are kind of fairy tales. Is that the right sort of language that he should be using if he does really want to unify the party, when there are a lot of Conservatives who do want to see tax cuts now?
Well, I think what Rishi's saying is we need to have a conservative economic policy. You know, and our conservative economic policy must be to deal with inflation first. That is what people are feeling at the moment. They can see food prices rising. I'm the energy minister. They can see energy prices rising as a result of Putin's invasion of Ukraine and all of these things. And I think the right conservative economic policy would be to get to grips with inflation, then to drive through growth, and then to deliver the tax cuts as a result of that growth. That is, if you like, what Margaret Thatcher did in 1979. Margaret Thatcher, when she became Prime Minister in 1979, she wasn't talking about tax cuts. She was talking about getting to grips with inflation. She did get to grips with inflation.
And create your 3 million
and she ultimately delivered the tax cuts as well. But her first priority in 1979 was dealing with inflation.
You'll remember, Greg, the reality is in the way that she dealt with it, driving down inflation, and the monetary policies that she implemented created 3 million unemployed within her first few years in office. We saw the conflict and the strife in some of our inner cities, Toxteth and Handsworth and places like that. We saw public services decimated. So, you know, any Conservative who thinks that the way to deal with the issue now is to rehash some Thatcherite solution, is that the kind of situation they want to see created inside the country again?
Well, I think Margaret Thatcher is much more popular than you think, Paul, actually. But I don't think actually this debate...
Not where I'm from, she's not.
I think this debate is actually about conservative economic policy and what should be the conservative economic policy. And that conservative economic policy has got to be getting to grips with inflation first. That is the issue. That is the one.
Inflation. The current inflation we've got within the system is not being driven by wage demands. I mean, wage rises over recent years have lagged behind inflation in many cases. The inflation we've got within the system is, as you touched on, coming from the situation in Ukraine, the opening up of the economy after the pandemic. It's simply unreasonable, isn't it, to say to workers, rail workers and other workers in the public and private sector, you've got to tighten your belts. It's not their wages in the first place that's driving this inflation, and arguably isn't going to make it worse if they get a decent pay increase.
Well, we all have to. One of the key elements of taking on inflation will be wage restraint. We've got to make sure...
What about profit restraint on behalf of the energy giants, for example, and the other people who are doing very nicely at the moment?
One of the reasons why Rishi Sunak introduced the energy profits levy was to make sure that energy companies are also paying their fair share and making sure they're making that contribution. But inflation is going to be... That is what the people are really feeling at the moment, is those rise in energy prices, the rise in food prices, the rise in other prices. That is what I think is the immediate priority for an incoming Conservative Prime Minister, is dealing with inflation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, which is a shame. We're just getting some really juicy issues.
Just another 5 minutes, come on.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for your time today. Greg Hands there, Government Minister at Bays, but also MP here in London, backing Rishi Sunak to be the next Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party. But as always, loads of you have been getting in touch with us. I am inundated with your views, which is what we like to see. So, Arlene, over to you first.
Yes, thanks, Deanna. So just on the leadership campaign, Sam says, I would like to ask why none of the candidates vying for the PM job appear to have broached arguably one of the most important issues facing the country, that is effectively dealing with the SNP and preserving the union. Whoever becomes Prime Minister needs to take the SNP full on. Scotland is suffering badly under Sturgeon and this urgently needs tackled before the United Kingdom is destroyed. And I would say here to that, Sam. And obviously, from a Northern Ireland perspective, we would like them to show their unionist credentials. right across the UK. And then we move back to a story which we had earlier on, Diana and Paul, in relation to the interview with Claire Fox. And we have Paul saying that he agrees with myself and Paul. We are creating a monumental problem in this country because we are encouraging children to get support for every emotion or behaviour, when in fact the state can't and never will be able to afford to provide the support. Paul is bang on. Child development should teach kids to cope with life's knocks, of which there are many. Then to the Telford scandal, of course, and that thousands of young girls being ignored, frankly, by the authorities, despite the fact that they are being abused. And Jones says, unfortunately, nothing will be done around these crimes in the same way that FGM is ignored and forced marriages are still overlooked. And just finally, there's one here which I wanted to read out, which it's interesting, and I think you will agree with this, everybody. Paul needs to be a Tory. Then you three could run the country. Other parties, like many of the Tory hopefuls, have no idea. There you go, we're going to run the country.
Oh, imagine, is there a more motley crew that could run the country than the three of us? Paul, what do you make of that? Are you going to cross the floor, come and join us?
Well, let me just say, in terms of any prospects of me joining the Tory party, Arlene, there's probably more chance of you joining Sinn Féin than of me joining the Tory party. And let's be blunt, that ain't ever going to happen either, is it?
Yeah, there we go. So what other views have you got for us, Paul? We've got absolutely loads today.
We've got Trevor, who says, what's disappointed me are the smears coming from the backers of Liz Truss in the media towards Penny Mordaunt. Let's have more positive debate. And there's one for you, Arlene, from Ted, who says, happy birthday, Arlene. Hope you have a great day. I keep up my membership with the DUP, even though I live in Wales, which is quite interesting. You've got a much further reach than you realise, naturally.
There you go, and still loads more of you getting in touch. We've got Marianne, who says, Paul says he doesn't want Conservatives in power, but honestly, would he trust the current Labour Party? Oh, one that I can definitely get behind. I hope Liz Truss wins. Not much of a talker, but it's definitely a doer. Give me someone who gets the job done every time. But then we've got Phil as well. He says, I really don't care who wins the Tory leadership, as after a lifetime of voting Tory, I'm not voting Tory again. Nothing to do with Boris. It was the betrayal by Sunak with the OAP pension triple lock. Loads more. Joshua says, feels like Tugendhat is being overlooked by the media despite being a strong candidate and performing well in the debate. Then finally, Ken, who says, doesn't matter who is nominated as the next PM. The obsessed media won't give up their constant barracking and sniping because whoever it is, they will still be a Tory. Oh, no, I'm saying final one. There's one more. I need to read this one out. Paul, this one is for you. Philip says, Michael Fabricant isn't the only Tory with a toupee. We can spot them, you know. I'm also a little suspicious of Paul's luxuriant thatch. There you are, Paul. So is it a toupee, Paul, or a GBNews exclusive?
He's welcome to come on the show and give it a tug, and he'll find very quickly that it's the authentic thing.
There you go, Philip. Just for you, Paul's hair is very much real. We get to the big issues here on GB News, but now it's time for an update on the week's biggest stories from the world of sport. And I'm delighted to say we're joined now in the studio by sports commentator and broadcaster Aidan McGee. Aidan, let's talk about England. Let's talk about vaccinations.
Do you need a sports minister, by the way, you three?
Good one. It's got to be me.
Yeah, yeah, just to drag the tone down a little bit more.
Yeah, you could be my junior minister, maybe. I'll do this.
All right. Well, I'm dressing a bit similar to you today.
Well, there you go. I'm flattered.
Yeah, so England and the vaccinations, it's causing a few problems here because the tournament may be 4 months away, but Gareth Southgate, according to a report by Matt Hughes in the Daily Mail yesterday, was explaining, well, no, he wasn't explaining, but the inference is that he's going to make his squad selections based on who's been vaccinated or their vaccination status. Problem with this World Cup is that it's a tight turnaround. So his problem is that the earliest England can arrive in Qatar is November the 14th. Their first game is on November the 21st against Iran. If Qatar maintain their quarantine laws, which means that players have to isolate or stay in quarantine for 5 days, then those players who don't have vaccination status, are not vaccinated, will have only 2 days to train with their teammates. Don't forget, they don't train. There won't be any training squads leading up to the World Cup because the Premier League is ongoing. So he's starting to think now, and we don't know how many players this concerns. We know John Stones is one of them because he was refused entry to the US yesterday as a Manchester City player. Phil Foden's one of them. They're two really important players. There's other players as well who are going to be tied up in this, and he's thinking, is it worth bringing them? Because otherwise you're talking about the situation, or we're going back to the situation with David Beckham back in 2002. Where you're bringing in injured players. You're effectively bringing in injured players.
Metatarsal, the famous metatarsal.
Yeah, Rooney in 06, Rooney in 2010. It didn't end well on those occasions, and he's starting to think, well, is it just best if I bring the players that I can actually work with? Manchester City, 3 players of theirs didn't get into the US yesterday. They've had to go to an alternative training camp with their elite under-23 squad in Croatia. Crystal Palace have had all manner of problems as well. They were able to field just 10 outfield players. Well, you would field 10 outfield players anyway, but they were just able to take 10 outfield players to Singapore and Australia in the last week or so, where they faced Liverpool, because the rest of them, or some of the rest of the players, weren't able to travel because their vaccination status didn't meet the entry requirements. So,
but presumably, Aidan, other international squads would have this similar
well, they have
in the World Cup. So England are not necessarily a disadvantage overall.
Well, we won't know until we know how many players are affected.
Yeah,
but we know that France are affected because N'Golo Kante can't get into the US with Chelsea this week. So France are affected. There are other countries around, but the Premier League said in January that I think it was 80% of the Premier League players have had double jabs. So the issue yesterday was Ilkay Gundogan, for example, the Man City player, he didn't get in because he'd only had 1 jab. So it's causing an absolute nightmare. FIFA are apparently lobbying Qatar to say, look, can you not relax this? You know, this is an extraordinary situation. We never had a World Cup in the middle of a season before. Can you not relax the rules just on this occasion? But we know that 80% of the players have had their double vaccinations, but we don't know in January whether they've had a third. We don't know whether Qatar will insist on a third. Who knows, even a fourth? That's what's been talked about the last few days.
And if some of the best players from all of the squads are simply not available, let's be blunt, it's going to take the gloss off the World Cup overall, isn't it?
Without question. And then you've got the issue with Chelsea yesterday. Chelsea's manager's not helping the situation, some would say, by saying that this summer they're looking to sign players, as Chelsea always do every year. But he's giving priority consideration to players who've had their vaccination status, because if you're an elite club, you travel to different countries and you encounter different entry requirements. So it's, as I say, it's something that we never really considered up until probably about a year ago. And it's going to be, it could affect the integrity, or not the integrity, maybe just the quality of the World Cup. So something has to give at some point, but we'll see where it goes. But there's a football agent quoted anonymously in the Mail yesterday saying that some of his clients are just being routinely overlooked by clubs based on their vaccination status. Gosh. Now, some would say that's extremely controversial. Those who agree with the bodily autonomy would insist that it shouldn't really matter.
But actually, it's sort of, I guess, given the restrictions in place in Qatar, there is an element of that making sense, isn't there?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, it's Qatar might be grateful for some of the spotlight to be taken off other things.
Surely there's no reason why the players can't go and just get regularly tested before they go, when they land.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happened. That's what happened when we had the restart of the Premier League back in 2020.
Why can't that be replicated?
Yeah, that's true. It hasn't been discussed enough. I guess they think, well, the World Cup's still 4 months away, but it's causing a problem now. I think Southgate's looking at the pre-season tours. Obviously, he's got a link to Crystal Palace, he used to play for them. He's seen the farcical situation that's engulfed them. So they've got a friendly at QPR next Saturday, which I'm going to. And I've invited a few Crystal Palace friends along, and they said to me, oh, it'll only be half the squad. And I went, really? And they said, yeah, well, half the squad who are vaccinated have gone to Australia and Singapore, and the other half who will be playing against QPR will be the ones who got left behind because they need match practice. Now, the issue there is that half the squad are in London, half the squad are in Australia, Singapore. I thought it was a team game. They're meant to play together, aren't they? So it's not ideal preparation for the start of the season. So either clubs get tough with players, which I don't think is going to happen, or they try and limit their overseas activity. The issue for clubs like Crystal Palace is that they get very handsomely rewarded for going on these pre-season tours, as do Liverpool, as do Manchester United, etc. Yeah. So that's the issue. And who'd have thought, talking about this even a year ago, that we thought this would be an issue. But I think there's just about enough time, though, Deanna, for some pressure to be leveraged on Qatar.
Yeah, well, let's keep an eye on this, get you back on in a few weeks and see how it is progressing.
I'll be a sports minister by then.
Oh, there we go. Well, I'll definitely bear you in mind.
You'll have resigned within 24 hours.
Well, guys, as ever, thank you for sticking with us. You've been watching and listening to The Political Correction. Come back next Sunday at 10 o'clock, but up next, don't go anywhere because it is the wonderful Alastair Stewart with a jam-packed show.
UK is looking dry, sunny and very warm for most. Cloudier for Scotland with some rain, so here's the detail.
A warm and sunny morning for the southwest, plenty of sunshine, temperatures climbing into the mid-20s, breezy on the coast, especially for Cornwall.
A fine and sunny morning for London and southeast England, turning very warm by midday with temperatures reaching the mid to high 20s Celsius.
A fine, dry and sunny morning across South Wales, although high cloud may turn the sunshine a little bit hazy at times. And if you're on the coast,